next speaker is Mr. Muhammad Noor from Rohingya Project. So please go ahead, Mr. Noor.
Yes, hi. Good morning and good evening, to depend on your location. I just want to pick up from where Brother Muhyiddin left, which is a couple of very interesting thing. Before that was the Dr. Faris Noor, a supplementary education, and of course the pre-COVID situation. So I'm gonna focus on something that is way before the mobility and zero ground. I will be focusing on education for stateless people and the refugee around the world, which is a huge crisis and an increasing crisis. So pre-COVID, the situation of stateless people and the refugees were already bad enough together. They were already excluded from mainstream education and university education and so on. Just to give you some very concrete example, in many countries, stateless and refugees are not even given a chance to go to a primary school, forget about the university education and online education and so on. So these things has already affected the questions of mobility itself. When it comes to here, rather than moving forward, is actually going backward. In terms of mobility, they were not allowed to move. They were not allowed to even go in any primary education, and lack of identity and many others, of course. So now these are some of the leading factors that now affecting the stateless people and the refugees, and particularly Rohingya, where all these factors now leading. Just to give you some of the example of that, before the COVID, there was schools, and then there's some institution that working to give education for the stateless and the refugees. These were already subjected to a lot of regulations from the ministries, from the relevant institution, from all these sectors, and then what kind of syllabus they are using now. So in the case of the Rohingya, where we are talking about roughly 3 million Rohingya stateless all around the world. Some of them are in Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and India, Bangladesh, and so on, where even education such as basic educations are restricted in many kind. Like in the instance of Bangladesh, Bangladesh has announced that Rohingya are not allowed to learn the language Bengali, so that they cannot integrate. And similarly goes to in India as well, and some part of Sri Lanka as well. So all these are now giving a huge issue now within the community. So now moving forward, when it comes to the education and mobility, all these students are what they are learning in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in India are the syllabus that are related to their own nationalistic agenda, which comes from teaching their own history, their own culture, and so on. Now these refugees are now divided into different clusters and sectors, and learning different things, which is not eventually relates to them. So now the huge important question that we now have to address is that, will the stateless and the refugees continue, the universities and schools will continue to exclude them from this even virtual and online opportunity that they're gonna come in the future. So now those are the conditions. What I've spoken is not like what is going to happen, but it's what is happening right now to the refugees and citizens. Now during the pandemic, it has actually accelerated more. From bad, it went to worst, where xenophobic ideas has come through, and People lost their jobs because they're refugees or they belong to a specific group such as Rohingya or any other of maybe Afghani or maybe Syrian or maybe Palestinian. So now they have lost their jobs. Livelihood is in issue. So if their parents do not have anything to support, now children and others has to be forced to work now on the road and so on. Now, during that period, many institutions was already poorly funded. Now, do not have funding at all, totally dried out, and restriction on this social distancing has made into a huge issue. And this institution, small institution, was actually contributed by the local community, and when local community is being disturbed, so now that particular institution, which is already low funded, underfunded, is already stopped now. Not because it could be due to funding, it could be due to legal restriction, or cracking down by the authorities. Why are you doing this? You are an illegal immigrant or illegal refugee existing here. So it has made it into a lot of huge challenges for these stateless and the refugees to even maintain the poorly funded, poor structure with the all these institutions they have. So now we are now in a post-COVID. So now from bad it went to worse. Now from worse is getting even worse. So now what is happening right now is that where people are preparing for all this education, where a lot of first world problem is happening and white collar problems, which is why a student should be why a student has to pay same amount of fee as they used to go physically because they are not using the facility like library and so on. While they're talking about this, we are talking about the basic, the ground level of survival. So education is already another. So now we're introducing, even though we introduce an online. So here we want to come on, what is the solution that we are offering? As a Rohingya project, of course, we know all this problem happening. So we have been planning for this to have an online university, online schools, online education. So while even providing that, the basics of that is that you need to have a good connection. You need to have a good device. You need to have a good infrastructure to get them online. So even that basic facility it doesn't have. Like, for instance, in Malaysia, refugees are not allowed to issue a SIM card. So if they don't have a SIM card, they don't have internet connection. Then all the mobility and virtual and all these things are just trashed out. And now coming back, then in Bangladesh, refugee camps, which is 1.5 million people exist there, very low connection, and the connection is very limited from morning to evening. After that, there is no connection. Within this limited connection, also the bandwidth is extremely low. So if you have crossed the internet connection, somehow you manage to get the internet connection, and then you have the bandwidth issue. So if you have the bandwidth, if you cross the bandwidth issue, then you have extremely lower end devices. So these lower end, it is not an iPhone, it is not a laptop, it is not a Samsung. So it is extremely Chinese, cheap, Vietnamese kind of phones, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. If you use 3G, they don't have a 3G. Sometimes they have 3G. When you use video conferencing, then it heats up the whole device. Then you got to put it in the water before it cools down. So these are the problems that we are currently facing today. So we are conducting online classes now by taking some volunteers from the United States, from Australia, from different parts of the world, giving classes online to this poor marginalized community all around the world. We have students from Saudi Arabia, we have a student from Malaysia, we have a student from India, Indonesia, and many other countries where the existing infrastructure in local settings are not giving them access at all, which used to have badly. Now they are totally stopped. They said, because we cannot even provide our own children own community, own local. So now people are, after the post, we are seeing a lot of colors in different countries: xenophobia, and Islamophobia, and all these things is actually creating a huge issue among the locals itself. This race is, against that race. So in this war, the war of elephant, I call it, and then these stateless and refugees are considered in a nation and ant. So these ants are being smashed within the fight of elephants. So I'm going back way to basics now. Before we get to even online, before the online you get to the universities, before the universities get uh, to the schools, even those poorly facilities are not given access to these people. So what Rohingya project, a small project, is trying to contribute into this is that how can we bring this? Because uh, before the online mobility and before the access, we already know that the only option. So for now, we are talking about different options for the different universities and the different schools. We are talking about marginalized status, which is, according to UN report from stateless and the refugees, about 80 million people today, which is also produced by the nation state, unfortunately, by the conflict, by politics, by this and then, and now is without even solving yet problems about to come in the Middle East and in South Asia, between India and Pakistan, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Israel and other countries. So there is expected to produce more refugees and stateless people, but without proper instructions, without proper giving solution to this, unfortunately it's going to expand. Unfortunately, it's going to create a lot of. So now it will eventually result into many things: exploitation, crime. So these, when you don't have education, when you don't have this already, people are vulnerable to many different things. Now today, if you look at the Syrian camps in Turkey, if you look at the refugee camps in Bangladesh, where child exploitation and a lot of other horrific things are happening because of the education, because of this mobility, because of, so it's all exclusion kind of things that is happening around this topic. So that's why the reason that I am focusing on this is because this is a very, very important issue, especially after the COVID. These people are marginalized even further. These people are criminalized even further. These people have been pushed back even. So now we will see a lot of bad result coming out of this. As I told you, crime and so on. So now I will make it try to short. So the whole idea of doing this project like a Rohingya project is trying to contribute a very small factor. 80 million people we are talking about, what we're going to do, and increasing population, what we're going to do, how we're going to give them the access, how we're going to bring them and make them into a usable force and workforce for different parts. Today, if we have given them access, we can give them access so they can work on a remote location on a different places, which was not possible earlier. So for different reasons today, this is only a way of not technology, not about. So it's only a way of mindset and the issues. How we're going to handle this? Are we going to include them in a situation where virtual and online things will be easy? Can we include them, or do we want to include them? To solve this crisis. So many universities and many other institutions, individual has a lot of responsibility as a human being. So we are talking about virtual and all this, but I'm going to end up. Does a stateless and a refugee do not have the right to education at all? Forget about online. And so that is my final thing, that are they not human beings? They do not have access. So I believe now the way it's moving forward, I can predict. I hope it will not happen, but I predict that they will also be excluded and they will be further marginalized on this context if we do not put it on the table, for everyone to grab this, because this is responsibility for every educated person. Because we are educated, we have the right. to give them access to also education to have a better life rather than pushing them away. So we cannot turn our blind eye. It has to be a shared responsibility on individual level and organizational level. Thank you for all the hosts who can move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhammad Noor, for your very important information about the problems and the reality that stateless and refugees are confronting in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you so much. Inclusiveness is a keyword to talk about the virtual mobility. So, Muhammad Noor, do you have any reaction to?
Yes, I mean, yes, what Brother Dr. Faris has mentioned, yes. The other thing about poor people, of course, in Southeast Asia and in Asia, in India, in Pakistan, slums where do not have all this connectivity. So I also would just want to add one thing on top of that. Of course, being is a very good example brother has given. What it feels like to be blockaded, what it feels like to be, you know, kept at home, what it feels like to be refugee and stateless. Having on top of that, these refugees we are talking about, these are not, some of them are not generational refugees like Rohingyas are, fifth generation, fourth generation. Some of these refugees are doctors, engineers, and scientists. But because of the war and political situation of different parts of the world, these people are driven. Their parents were highly educated into science, astronomical, engineering, and so on. And their children became beggars immediately after that. So it could happen to anyone. So there's a pipeline going on from middle class and high class. You can be pushed into poor immediately because of war, because of politics, because of that, and that poor will result into refugees or even stateless, and it could happen to anyone. So we are safeguards and gatekeepers of all this. So we have to really make sure that who are these refugees? These are, it could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody, because these nation states can revoke your identity within a second because you have said something else. Today you are a Japanese or American passport holder. When you wake up, you are nothing. Or in the middle of the plane, you will stuck in Russia, for seeking asylum. So these kind of things can happen to anyone. So all these children of refugees, their parents were highly educated. I mean, I have seen, you wouldn't believe, atomic scientist is selling, bread on the road of Indonesia and Malaysia. There were Syrians, there were this, and now the children are struggling to learn basic education as well. So it's very, very important. So these were the good citizens, and they were made into poor, and from poor they went to, so now they went below the poverty line. Not within decades, within one decade, within a couple of years.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it can happen to anyone. That's true. Yeah.